Welcome back to our self-care class. One of your peers had a request about having bereavement self-care. So, I'm just going to do a quick lecture on bereavement self-care, not just focusing on like death and dying in general, but just of loss. So, what is the difference between grief and bereavement? So, grief is the mental suffering or distress over a loss or affliction, a sharp sorrow, a painful regret. At the very heart of the grief definitions is intense sorrow, is a deep emotional response to a great loss. So this is just kind of like the mental suffering. So that's what we could think of when we think of grief. So bereavement. Bereavement is a period of grief and mourning after a death. So it's part of the normal process of reacting to a loss. You may experience grief as a mental, physical, social, or emotional reaction. Mental reactions can include anger, guilt, anxiety, sadness, and despair. Physical reactions can include sleeping problems, changes in appetite, physical problems, or illnesses. So that's kind of like the difference between grief and bereavement. So what does it mean if someone is dying or has died? So we'll focus on a little bit of death and dying, but mostly I'm going to be focusing on loss in general. So dying, people approach the end of their life, new issues can arise. So a new symptom may become apparent, or an existing one may get worse. A person approaching the end of life is likely to be less able to do the things that they did before. So that's like the dying is just more of the process. So death, this is like your body ceases to exist. Like all biological functions just stop working. A phenomenon which commonly brings about death includes aging, malnutrition, disease, suicide, homicide, starvation, dehydrations, and accidents or trauma resulting in terminal injury. So grief. So again, we'll talk about about how grief is an emotional and physical reaction to loss. So this loss could be of death. It could be through ill health. Someone just gets a diagnosis of a terminal illness. So that could be a loss in their like health. So people grieve, especially people like who know someone who received a diagnosis of Alzheimer's. Sometimes they have that feelings of grief of losing that one through that disease. Loss of part of ourselves, loss of something we value. So I know like a lot of people are having like kind of like grief symptoms right now because they have that loss of our routine and not going to program, not seeing our friends and not talking to people, to our friends and having our classes and just that routine. So that could be also having feelings of grief, or even people who have retired or have been in our lives for a long time and are just retiring, or they're moving on, or they just found a new job, so they've left. Those could be feelings of grief as well. So again, grief is highly individual, meaning not everyone grieves the same way. It's a non-linear process, meaning there's no like stages. It's just things happen, like our feelings just fluctuate. And the grief is as individual as our lives. So a lot of people like say there's 5 stages, which it kind of creates like that little like box, like that perfect wrapped up in a bow like definition of grief. But grief is really not like something that you could put in a box or in stages. So you could fluctuate between these emotions. So there could be denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, are kind of like all these like feelings people feel in grief, and it could fluctuate in any time. So we'll stop there for now and I'll continue on the next part.